Chapter 10 of the battle which the Child of the Sea had with King Abies, and how he conquered him, whereby the war between Abies and King Perion was concluded. But they on both sides, seeing that the greater part of the day was spent, determined that the combat should be delayed till morrow, albeit against the will of both champions, and this also they did with their arms might be repaired, and some remedy applied to their wounds, and because both armies, being wearied and having been hardly handled, stood in need of rest. The Child of the Sea therefore entered the town with Argives and King Perion, and he rode along with his head unarmed. The people cried out, "Ah, good knight! God give thee grace to proceed as thou hast begun. Thou art a fair knight, and one upon whom knighthood was well bestowed." As they drew nigh the palace, a damsel met them, and said to the Child of the Sea that the queen desired that he should not be disarmed anywhere but in her apartments. This was at the king's desire, who now said, "Friend, you must needs grant this request, and Argives must bear you company." So they went thither, where they found the queen with her many ladies and damsels ready to disarm them. But the queen would suffer none of them to touch the Child of the Sea, whom she herself disarmed and threw a mantle over him. The king then came and saw how he was wounded, and asked him why he had not delayed the day of the battle. "It had been needless," quoth the child. "I have no wound to detain me." So they presently dressed his wounds, and the supper was brought. On the morrow the queen and her ladies went to visit them, and they found them conversing with the king. Then mass was said, which being ended, the child armed himself, not in the arms which he had worn yesterday, but for they had been so dealt with that they were useless, but in a rich and goodly armor. Then he took leave of the queen and mounted a fresh horse. King Perion carried his helm, and an old knight called Aganon his lance, and Prince Argives his shield, whereon were portrayed two azure lions in a field of gold, rampant the one against the other. They went out from the town and found King Abies mounted on a large black courser, armed at all points save his head. The townsmen and those of the host most placed themselves where they might best see the combat. The lists were marked out, and scaffolding erected around them. Then they laced on their helmets. King Abies hung round his neck a shield which bore a giant in a field of azure, and a knight beheading him. For so he had once slain a giant who had laid waste to his country. When they were both taken their arms, all who were in the lists went out, each commending their own champion to God. And the two knights ran at each other, as though they were of great strength and good heart. At the first encounter, all their arms failed, and lances pierced through shields and breastplate, and into flesh, and the staves flew in pieces, and they met body to body, and horse to horse, so furiously that both fell, and all the beholders thought them dead. But soon they rose, and plucked the spearheads from the wound, and engaged so fiercely with their swords that it was fearful to see them. Yet the combat seemed unequal, not that the Child of the Sea was not well made and of a goodly stature, but King Abies was so large that there was no knight that he did not exceed in stature by a palm, and his limbs were like those of a giant. He was, however, beloved by his people, and had him in all good qualities, except that he was too proud. The battle between them was cruel and without any respite, and their strokes resounded like the fight of 20 knights. They sliced away the shields, battered the helmets, hewed away the harnesses, and each bled so fast that it was a wonder that they could endure. And thus they continued till the hour of tierce, and the sun grew hot, and heated their armor, so that they began to wax somewhat feeble. At this time King Abies drew back. "Hold," said he, "let us rest, if you wilt. Thou art the best knight I ever combated withal, but I shall not for that spare thee. For thou hast killed him who I love best, and now put me to shame that the battle should last so long before so many good men." The Child of the Sea answered him, "King Abies, thou hast shame for this, not for entering this country in thy pride and doing so much evil to him who has not deserved it at thy hands. Remember that men and kings especially are not to do what they can, but what they ought. Now thou wishest to rest, so that have they whom in your oppression you would not allow rest, and that you may feel that you have and that you may feel that you have made others feel. Look to yourself. You shall not rest here, Abes. Abes then took his sword, and with a little of the shield that was left, "To thy own misfortune dost thou brave me," quoth he, "for thou shalt not leave these lists till I have cut off thy head." "Do thy utmost," cried the child. Herewithin more cruelly than before they renewed the battle, as if it were even then begun. King Abes, who was well practised in arms, fought warily now, warding the sword of his antagonist, and striking where the blow could injure most. But the lightness and promptitude of the child made him in the end lose ground. And now has the child destroyed all the remaining parts of his shield, and wounded him so often that the sword turned in his hand for weakness, and so pressed he was that he gave back, and almost turned to fly, seeking some safety against that sword that so cruelly he felt. But when he saw no remedy but death, he grasped his sword in both hands and smote at the child, thinking to hew his helmet. The shield caught the blow, and the sword pierced in so deep that Abes could not pull it forth. The child, in return, struck him so fiercely on the left leg that he cut it off, and the king fell. The child set foot upon him, and plucking off his helmet, said, "Thou art dead, King Abes, if thou dost not yield thyself vanquished." He replied, "I am indeed dead, not vanquished, and my pride has overthrown me. I pray thee, let assurance be given to my people that they may safely depart, and carry me into my own country. I forgive thee and all that whom I hated, and all that I have taken from King Perion shall be restored, and I beseech you let me be confessed." When the Child of the Sea heard this, he was exceedingly sorrowful for King Abes, though he knew that he would have been without pity had he been the conqueror. Now the men of the army and the town assembled in peace. King Abes ordered all his conquests to be restored, and Perion gave assurance to the Irish that they might return in safety. And Abes, having received all the sacraments of the Holy Church, gave up the ghost, and they carried him to his own country, making great lamentations for his loss. King Perion and Arges and the chiefs of the realm then came to the child, and led him away from the field with such honours as conquerors in these feats are wont to receive, who by their prowess procure not only glory to themselves, but the welfare of a ruined country. The damsel of Denmark had arrived at the commencement of the battle, and now, seeing how happily it had ended, she came up to him. "Child of the Sea, speak with me apart." He went aside with her, and then she said, "Oriana, your mistress, has sent me, and I'll bring you from her this writing wherein you shall find your name." He took the writing, but he had heard nothing save the name of his lady, and that so confused him that the writing fell from his hand, and he dropped the reins upon his horse's neck. "What now, sir?" quoth she. "Take you so ill the message that comes from the noblest damsel in the world, and who so dearly love you, that hath made me endure so much toil in your search?" "Friend," said he, "I did not hear what you said for this pain which seized me, as you once witnessed heretofore." She answered, "You need not dissemble with me. I know both your affairs and my lady's, for she has trusted me. And if you love her, you do no wrong, for it is not easy to relate how dearly she loveth you." And with that she repeated Oriana's message, and gave him again the writing, which he opened, and saw that his name was Amadis. The damsel, having accomplished her errand, would then have returned, but he besought her to remain till the third day, and then he would accompany her. "I come to you," she replied, "and I shall do as you command." The child then rejoined King Perion, who is awaiting him. As they entered the city, the people welcomed with shouts their deliverer. So they proceeded to the palace, and in the child's chamber they found the queen and all her ladies, and they took him in their arms from his horse, and the queen disarmed him, and master came and searched his wounds, which though were many were without danger. The king desired that he and Arges would eat with him, and he would have no company than the damsel, to whom he did all honour that could be devised. Thus he remained some days, nor did his wounds prevent him from walking frequently in the great hall to converse with the damsel, whom he still detained till he could bear arms and accompany her.